What we're going to start with is a discussion about site security assessment. So we want to talk about what is that and why do we need to do it? And I want to do that fairly briefly. And then we want to talk about why a handheld device is so critical for successfully doing these cybersecurity assessments. And we want to give you that insight because a lot of people, think they can do everything from the network side, but it's really not possible to do it as accurately and consistently as you might need to have. And so we want to talk about the specific role of a handheld in that. And as we go through those things to highlight what is important about a handheld, and then James will then do the demonstrations showing the cyberscope usage for doing that site assessment. So that's where we're at in terms of our objectives. In terms of our outline, I'm going to do a bit of an introduction as to why it's important to do these assessments. And then we've really got three main modules in this webinar. The first one, we'll be talking about how to validate that you've assigned the appropriate network security controls. Then we're going to talk about how you discover all the devices on the network. And then we'll be talking about how you profile those devices. So think of this as three sections with three separate demonstrations that we'll be taking you through. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with why do we need cyber security assessments? And this might be obvious to several of you, especially as we see the poll results. Some of you are already doing cybersecurity assessments today. But this doing a site assessment is really the most effective way for you to see whether, I shouldn't say the most effective way, one of the most effective ways to make sure that you're actually ready and prepared for, your preparedness against a potential attack by an outside threat to your network. And what the cybersecurity assessment does is it provides an evaluation of your network preparedness. And so it, for instance, will assess what assets you have on your network and how those assets are protected. It will take you through an inspection of all the devices that are on your network, particularly on the client and the endpoint side, what is actually connected to your network. And over a period of time, what you want to have is not only what's connected now, but what's been connected, and in the future, what's new and new to being connected to your network, so you can assess the appropriate security policies that you want to apply. And really what we're trying here is to try and identify weaknesses, vulnerabilities of your network so you can close those vulnerabilities. When we look at doing a cybersecurity assessment, there are many parts to that, but there are four key parts that you want to be making sure that you do. The first one is the discovery process, making sure that you've actually discovered all of the devices that are connected onto your network, so the network nodes and your endpoints. Then what you need to do is you need to say, okay, now I've discovered them, right? So maybe you've got an IP address, a MAC address, etc. What are those devices? How would you classify them? Because if you don't classify them correctly, you cannot apply the appropriate security policy. Once you've got them classified, then you can go on and say, okay, how do I analyze this network? How is it configured? How is it segmented? And it's very important to consider both the wireless and the wired side of your network. And one of the exciting things I find on the Cyberscope is the ability to do both of those. And James will demonstrate that a little bit later on. And of course, once you know how your network is configured, then you need to validate that you've actually conformed to the industry best practices. And you may want to a deep dive on a specific device to make sure that the policies have been applied correctly and appropriately in your network. And again, looking for where it may not have been correctly configured so that you can identify those weaknesses. So we've now discussed what a cybersecurity assessment is. We've talked about the major tasks. What we then want to go on is to talk about those 3 pieces that I mentioned we want to do in this webinar. The first of those pieces is to take a look at how your network is configured, how it is segmented. And each of these little sections in this webinar start with the same slide. And you can see over on the left, I've got the security risk, and over on the right, I've highlighted the problem. So each of these 3 modules will talk like that. And when we look at the security risks of your configuration segmentation, one of the things I've seen so many times in our network is the misconfiguration, and something is not slightly misconfigured, and that opens up a major vulnerability into your network, and attackers are looking for those things and will exploit those in order to get to your network. So one of the things, the first thing we want to do when looking at a network is to check that your access controls have been applied and applied correctly. And this is like, if you like, the first line of defense for protecting your network. Now, the problem when you do this from a networking perspective, right, is that it does give you a glimpse into how your network is configured. But what a field analyzer does is you're actually out in the field itself where the clients are actually connecting, where the network equipment actually is located. And so when you use the cyberscope, what you're able to do is you're able to see it from a client perspective as opposed to a network perspective. And this is incredibly important because you're not just watching what's happening in the network, but you're actually able to connect and actually check that connection, look to see whether you're connecting correctly, look to see if there's any vulnerabilities as you're actually connecting. So it's really important to understand the real value of a handheld is the fact you're looking at it from a client perspective. And you can, with the cyberscope, can connect wirelessly, wireline. You're physically on site, so you can see what's actually happening. And you actually have visibility to the traffic that's going across the network. So having said that, move on to the next one. What we want to do in this demonstration is we want to take a look at the best practices and show you how you can validate those best practices have been applied in your network. So James is going to show you how he can connect to different networks, how he can validate those things, ensure proper segmentation. And one of the important things James and I have just been discussing quite recently is we also wanted to talk a little bit about broadcast services, particularly wanting to make sure that you're not having devices that are saying, connect to me, and or if you are, you're aware of what they are, because you don't want your devices to be connecting to things that they shouldn't be, and particularly important in the consumer space where you might see Matter Play or Alexis kind of connectivity. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to James, who's going to show you exactly what I've been talking about.
All right, thank you. Let me share my screen in. Okay, so here you can see the front screen of the cyberscope. Obviously a lot of potential here, capture, discovery, Wi-Fi, and we'll go into different apps. But for the purpose of sort of access test and validation of access provisioning, the primary tool is the auto test tool. One of the things that makes our field tester unique is it has two wired ports, and it has 2 Wi-Fi ports. And so it has a lot of ability to connect to the network in different ways. It also has fiber ports if you want to validate any sort of a fiber connection. And then within any connection, you basically define a profile. So here is a wired profile, and gives you some sense of some of the things we do. To be honest with you, a security risk might be, and we see this a lot, is sort of RJ abandonment, or RJs left, in the wild with maybe PoE enabled, which is an opening for somebody to put in a small device that doesn't even a wall wart, right? It gets perpetual power. So there's some nice things such as identifying PoE, identifying the switch ports that you're connected to, validating that things are going into the right VLANs, and of course your DHCP address and subnet and lease times, and making sure all that's right. But really, where it gets interesting is in these service tests. And so for one example, let's say on this network, I shouldn't be able to get to a particular web service. And so here's our HTTP test to pull that web service, but we can see that we're getting a 403. And that's a failure. Now, one thing that's nice is sometimes a failure is actually a pass. And so in this case, I could actually come in and say, hey, I'm expecting a 403. And then instead of this being a failure, as you can see here, because we had that, I'll test again. And now it's a success because I actually got my 403 and it's green, right? And that's even reflected out here at the top level. So that's one example of sort of validating connectivity. I can and can't get to this based on this particular network that I'm connected to. When I think of this particular network I'm connected to, I think of you've joined a specific VLAN, either because you're on a native port or because you're on a trunk port. You can actually specify the VLAN to join, or you've joined a specific SSID. Another example is service validation. And so we have Nmap integrated into the product. And so you might decide that AirPlay is a very open sharing system, right, that Apple has. And so you might decide you don't want any AirPlay. And so what we've done is we've taken Nmap and we allow you to take the otherwise very complicated Nmap commands and scripts and things like that. Of course, there's hundreds of scripts and bajillions of command line options, but it allows you to basically give it a nice friendly name, like no AirPlay. And then we also provide you the ability to do grading. In fact, let me go back to this guy here. And you can say, hey, even with regular expressions, if you wanted to test with multiple services, but in this case, it's simple. I'm just going to say, hey, the result must not contain AirPlay. It kind of previous to the similar example, you can also, if you're just trying to make sure that something does exist, you can say, hey, the result must contain Matter or whatever service you're expecting to be there. So come back out here. And so here you can see the Nmap output. And in fact, we've highlighted that there's AirPlay running. In this case, it's on a particular TV. It's also running on a Roku box. And we see this a lot where consumer stuff. One of my favorite tests is just to do no Alexa, because that's also a broadcast service. And it's amazing how often some Alexa devices crept into network organizations. Let's see. And then here's an example of so this is the example where I was expecting something, but I didn't get it. I was expecting a thread protocol, and that wasn't there. And so here I've flagged that, but I've said it's a warning, not an error. Whenever you say that it must or must not contain this particular string, you can also say that when you detect that, that's either a warning or an error. And then lastly, I've got some validation of a server based on this particular connection. So, and in this case, I've said, hey, I have to use public keys only for SSH, and I'm detecting that this particular server is allowing a pre-shared password. So that gives you some idea of the auto test. And that was on a wired network. Of course, I can do it on a Wi-Fi network. And what's really nice here, when you go into production networks, there's typically a half dozen, maybe more SSIDs, right? And whether you're in healthcare or retail or whatever. And so being able to validate that certain services or servers are reachable or not reachable from different networks is a big part of validating provisioning. And so a real simple example is into a guest network. If I connect to a guest network that I was able to get an IP address, but I couldn't go any further. Or another example is making sure that ping is turned off on the gateway device, because a common thing to do would be to join a guest network and then DDoS attack the router gateway. And so you can see that. Likewise, there's the all good case here. I'm connected to my production network and verifying that I can get to any number of services and servers. And so that gives you some idea of auto test. These are all grouped together. They happen under a single button press. I start, it runs automatically. You can hand the test off to somebody and they can run around. Especially powerful field tester when you have multiple sites, which is common in education, retail, healthcare, et cetera. And then all these results, of course, go up to our Link Live portal. And so here you can see those same test results that I was just showing you. And here's our Wi-Fi test. Here's our Wi-Fi test into the guest network. Here was our wire test, and I can see all the same details here. So here was all the service tests that I wanted to do when connected to this particular network. And in fact, I can come in here and see exactly the same information is on the screen. So it's really nice. One of the nice things about a field tester is you can give it to somebody, they can go around, plug in, run some tests in the field. You can sit back from across the country and look at those results and have all the same information that they had on the handheld, and you're able to, of course, generate reports and things like that. So with that, I'll hand it back over to you, Avril.
Say, James, pardon me, I have just a real quick question that just came up. It's directed to you.
Sure.
How does Cyberscope use ARP in its discovery process?
ARP. So there's a lot that happens during discovery, but one phase is, of course, ARPing, doing a subnet sweep. And so any subnets, any traffic that we see and we detect the networks, depending on kind of what your broadcast domain is, we will ARP sweep that network. Now you can control the rate of that progress also, right? Because there are particular environments where an IDS, an intrusion detection system, might tell you that you can't do, like in particular, I think Cisco, if a client does more than 22 ARPs in a second, it basically shuts down the port. And so we have the ability for you to do rate controls on our discovery process so that you don't trigger IDSs.
Great, thank you, James.
Great, so I'm going to grab back control here, back on our slides. Great. So I wanted to show everybody over here, we've got on the left-hand side is a picture of the NetAlly. NetAlly Cyberscope, a piece of equipment, and circled there is the tool that James was demonstrating for you. And as he mentioned, this is a tool that someone can use out on a remote site. And then what he showed with NetAlly, an expert could be looking at that data in a central location. So I just wanted people to have an insight as to what this tool looked like before I move on. So in that previous section, the first part, we were talking about how to validate your configuration, your segmentation to make sure the network has been configured correctly. Now, what we want to do is go on to the second module of this webinar, which is talking about how you physically locate to your devices. Now, from a security perspective, right, it's almost impossible to protect against unauthorized access if you don't know what devices are out there, the location of the network nodes, and the different devices that are trying to connect to the network. And it's really super important to have the physical location because that's all part of how you might want to set up your security policies. If you don't know the actual physical location is very, it can lead to vulnerabilities, allow other people to access the network that aren't authorized. It can be very difficult to monitor it. And so what we want to do is we want to say, how do I keep my location, my inventory of what's connected to the network up to date? Now, many of you may use network mapping tools, and larger organizations tend to have quite sophisticated network mapping tools. Smaller organizations tend to have more simplistic ones. So the complexity of these mapping tools can vary quite considerably. But one thing that's common with these mapping tools is that they can be very difficult to maintain and keep accurate, and it can be very resource intensive. And this is particularly problematic if you're dealing with with an organization that has a lot of distributed locations, where the business isn't all in one location where all your IT staff is located. And so there tends to be quite a high risk of inaccuracy when you're talking about where are your devices, what does your network actually look like. And again, the advantage of having a handheld device that you can send out on site to assess what devices are there, and you can share this device between different sites. So it's not like, that you need to be doing this all the time. That's based on your security policies, based on how many changes you might see in the network. But one of the advantages is that you can actually get a much more accurate, because not only are you doing it on site, but you can visually verify the location and the type of device that you're looking at. So one of the things we want to then in this next module in our webinar is to take a look at how Cyberscope can help you discover and locate those network access assets that you have on the device. And of course, it will do things like discovering the MAC and IP addresses of all the devices on the network, but it can do both the wireline and wireless. So it can locate all the wireless devices where they are. And one of the important things, as I mentioned earlier, is not only seeing what's there today, but based on history, you can say what isn't there or what's new. And again, that helps you define better security policies. So let me hand back to James and have him do his next demonstration of Cyberscope.
All right, thank you. Okay, so this time we're going to focus on a variety of other apps. In particular, our Discovery app and our Wi-Fi app, also a little bit on AirMapper here. So Discovery is a holistic view of everything we've discovered on the network, wired and Wi-Fi. And so here I can see all my devices. We have things like free string search. Let's say I wanted to see if there were any Raspberry Pis. I could just start to type AR, right? And it'll do an auto select search and come in and go, whoa, well, there's one right there, and immediately go into the details. We've already detected some problems with it. I can come down and look at, well, what ports and services are opening. It's running SSH. And even go into things like OS detection, right? So here I can see the version of Linux it's running and all that. And so, but really from a holistic standpoint, when you're looking at all these devices and in the typical production network, of course, this will be in the hundreds, if not thousands. It's really handy to have sorts and filters, and so you can immediately come in. And if you want to look at particular device types, maybe a common thing is you get things out of the box and maybe they have SNMP turned on and they have the public community string, right? You can just come in and filter and immediately see all things that are running SNMP. And of course, there's the ability to go in and look at things in details, not understand ports and services, but where they're located, versions of OSs. And how they're provisioned in terms of VLANs. And this is even where you can understand how other things are connected into the network. This particular port is up, and it's got, in case no device on it. So anyway, gives you some idea of that. Now, what's really nice is you've not only got the ability on the unit to look at these devices, but also one of the unique thing about this as a field tester is it's scanning for both wired and Wi-Fi, and we can match up and tell you exactly what the Wi-Fi clients are. And so if you're looking at centralized monitoring, you're just seeing packets go by. You don't really know, how the device was connected. So in this case, let me drill in on, let's see here. Let's pick this desktop here. I'm looking at this guy here. We're looking at, we see his IP address and all that, but we also see how it's connected. And in fact, I can pivot over to it from a Wi-Fi perspective and understand the channel, the AP, the SSID, and all the details of how he's connected to the network. So you've got this ability to understand devices, how they're connected, where they're located and all that. Now, everything you do on the product here, you can push up to Link Live. You simply upload your snapshot to Link Live, and then at that point, here's a discovery. You can look at it any number of ways. You can look at it in a spreadsheet view, but probably one of the more powerful ways is a topology view. So here's a network, and you can see, in fact, what's kind of unique about us is that we map out not only the wired but the Wi-Fi networks that you see, and you don't see that in any other topology mapping. They're just wireline based, and because we have the combination of radios, so I could, for example, go in and look at this and try to understand a little bit more about what's connected. I can start to throw more information on each of the nodes. Understand the SSID that they're connected to, what channels they're connected on, what sort of media types, things like that. And so, quite handy there. But a lot of ability, of course, you're looking for oddities and provisioning issues and things like that. And so this is where these filters come in handy. So for example, I could come in and say, well, this is a lot to look at, but really I'm worried about this particular VLAN. Let's go, and we show you how many devices show up on each here. But let's say we want to just focus on VLAN 500 because that's our most important production network. And here I can see exactly the devices that are connected to that network. So a lot of ability to filter, in fact, I think I can just type VM and look at my virtual machines, and and on and on. And so you've got this free string search capability. You've got these guided filters here. I want to look at only my servers and switches and phones on a particular subnet or anything like that, and just filter that down and understand. And so ideally, you can immediately spot the outliers here. Another way to think about it is that we allow you to, in discovery, an underutilized tool in security is a Wi-Fi survey. And so and they can be quite simple. They can just take a couple minutes. In fact, in a lot of cases, you just need to walk the perimeter of the facility. But here's an example of really what's happening is more and more infrastructure devices. Let's take our printers, right? That almost exclusively required an RJ drop and an Ethernet connection in the past are now being connected by Wi-Fi, wall monitors, security cameras, on and on and on, right? More things are migrating to Wi-Fi. Another way to understand where things are and what devices exist in your network is to do a quick survey. Here you can see a real simple one, just took a few minutes. There's the path that was walked. And then again, you can come in and filter and look at different things. So I might come in and look at this and say, boy, you know what? I know my production networks here. In fact, Fusion is infusion pumps, right? This is a hospital. And in fact, I can come in and filter and see that I've got coverage, but also in every case that SSID is being advertised from one of my production APs and the Cisco AP. a problem, one of the problems these days is of course, hotspots and the ability for somebody to backhaul information out of your site. And so if you were to see a hotspot, for example, let's take this guy, looks a little nefarious. I can go ahead and apply him. I can see that, oh, that's where he's located at. And in fact, if I really want to get specific, I can kind of come down and neck it down. You can also, of course, always we have the ability to show the AP location per se. You can see it right there. And so this ability to understand where things are, where all the hotspots are, where the legit SSIDs, where the ones that you don't want are, is quite nice and survey. And something we just recently added is not just, if I looked at this guy, I would see that he's an ellipsis jetpack. There's the AP. He's actually on a bad channel and interfering with my normal production network. But another way to look at this would be something that we just added, which is a client survey. And this is sort of the first in the industry. So if you want to understand where your clients are, likewise, you can come in and say, hey, you know what? I want to understand what's connected to that jetpack. And let's go ahead and apply that. And it's over here, and it's a Hanhai device. I don't quite know what it is, but it's connected to that, and that's where it's located. And it was actually transmitting a fair amount. Maybe it was backhauling information out. And so a lot of tools here for you to between topology maps and heat maps and things like that, and analysis tables to basically understand the entirety of the assets and the endpoints and the infrastructure of your network, how it's all provisioned, what's on what VLANs and what's on what SSIDs, and where things are located. So with that,
Did we lose James, Brad?
We may have. Hopefully he can come back in, but why don't you just go ahead and proceed? You'll have to. Oh, he's back. He's back.
Oh, okay. Okay, good. Okay, so let me grab back the slides. Great. Okay, so what we've done so far is we've talked about how to validate the network using what can be standardized, scripts that you can write using this tool over here on the far right. What James just demonstrated was then using these tools here on the ComScope. And so you're starting to see a bit of a process that one can follow when doing a site survey. That's, these things, you just move forward on these tools. So now we want to move on to the third part of this webinar. And this, to me, is my favorite part, is where I start to see tremendous value being added to the network. So it's the one that excites me the most, or maybe I've just been burnt the most with this part of doing site analysis. But when we look at, we've validated the network, made sure the configuration, we've exposed any vulnerabilities, we've identified the devices. Now we want to say, well, what is that device? A bit like James was showing in the demonstration, what is it? And if we don't know what the device is, we can't define the security policies that we want to apply to that device. And so one of the advantages of having a handheld as opposed to doing this via the network is, of course, you are able to visually see what it is. You can visually see and verify the locations I meant before. But it's also, one of the important things is when you do this on a network side and it says, oh, I look at the MAC address, I look at the operating system, etc., I can do a degree of certainty on the network side, like laptops, like Windows devices, MacBooks. Those can be fairly clearly identified and given a high certainty. So it might be given a 90% certainty that we've profiled this device correctly. But a lot of our businesses have an increasing number of other devices that aren't typically laptops, aren't heavily computer based, where we can identify things like the operating environment. And so those ones get really difficult to profile, and they tend to have a certainty metrics of something like 5 or 10%. And if you have a certainty that this device has been profiled correctly by the network at a 5%, you're obviously going to apply very stringent security controls, because you just don't know what the device is and where it should go. And that can often cause major business problems, because the users might need to have that device access part of your network. And as a security professional, you're very concerned about exposing those parts of your network. So what if we can get that certainty metrics up much higher, give you a much higher confidence level that you've profiled that device correctly? And that is why I find this part to be most exciting, because I think it provides security professionals with the data that they're really looking for to then help meet the business needs, and stop that fight between business users wanting access and security saying, we just don't want to give that to you, right? Or we don't want to expose our network. And so when we look at this last part, and what James will be demoing for you, is how to do that profiling. And what I really like about what James is about to show you is not only the profiling, but how you can take an individual device and then deep dive onto it, and really exploit it, and look at it. And also, as part of that, he's also going to illustrate how you can actually capture traffic. So not only profile the device by looking at it, but looking at what he's doing, what traffic is actually going over this device, and what behaviors is it exhibiting. And so with that, James, I want you to do the most exciting part of the demo. I'm handing back to you for your demo.
All right, thank you. Let's see, share screen again. Okay, so let's go back into Discovery here, and you can see all of our devices, and I can sort and filter. Some of these devices we've automatically tagged for investigation, right? And so, for example, this particular guy is yellow. I can see that I've got a problem here. He's running a service. In fact, he's running it on both IPv6 and on IPv4. It's AJP. In fact, I know there's an AJP vulnerability. Here we can see, boy, he's got a lot of stuff he's running. And so you could then go in and dive in further on this particular unit. And so things get, and I can even sort by problems. I can sort by device types if I want to understand things from a sort of from a manufacturer Mac perspective. I can sort there. Whatever you're sorting on actually shows up here as the secondary key, and then of course I can do that in forward and reverse sorts. But let's go back to sort of, I'll just do IP addresses for simplicity, and even things that look somewhat benign. Let's take a look at this Apple device. Apple mentioned Apple devices. So here's a device. If I want to dive further on something on the go, then I can just come in and I've got just an arsenal of tools to throw at this thing. Port scans, captures. I can add it to an auto test. Things like that. But let's first take a look at Nmap. I could come in and say, hey, I want to do let's say an OS detection. I want to understand what it's running. And so I'll go ahead and fire that up. And if I were to come in here and then look at the OS detection, I can see that it's running a quite old version of Mac OS, right? And here again, in this particular test, I could say, if you see Mac OS 10.x, or using regular expressions, you can define any sort of a search string that you want. Then you can basically flag that and make it red too. If I want to understand more about where it's at, so now I kind of know what services it's running, what ports are open, and all that. Another thing I could do is to understand where it is we have path analysis, and our path analysis is quite unique in that it does both layer 2 working through switches and Wi-Fi. So I think we have one of the only, in fact, the only path analysis. So if I want to understand kind of what's between me and this thing, I need to go hunt this down or understand it better. I can run that path analysis, and basically I understand that, well, here I am, and I'm connected on a 2.5 gig link into this port of this switch, goes out this switch, goes into this switch, which goes into this AP on channel 36 running 802.11n, and there it is actually connected. And so I can actually get down to the particular AP that I'm running on, and I can give it, and then even go into further discovery here. Anything that's blue is clickable. So, so now I have a sense of where he's located in the network. So now, so I'm looking at it from a discovery viewpoint. This is sort of an IP address layer 3 and up. I'm going to pivot here to the Wi-Fi view of him. This is also unique. Since we have multiple Wi-Fi radios and multiple wired ports, when we see something on the network, even if you're only connected wirelessly with multiple Wi-Fi radios, one radio can be scanning for looking at all the channels and discovering all the APs and all the clients. The other radio can be connected and doing active discovery. And in fact, that's what's happened here. So I know this. I know that, and if you look at Wi-Fi tools, they predominantly only do layer 2, right? They don't really understand more about the device, and it's sending packets in the air with this MAC address. And so that's a unique thing about the cyberscope. But I'll go ahead and click on this, and now I've pivoted over to the Wi-Fi view, and now I can understand where it's connected. And a common way to locate something might be to do an RF locate. Here we support an external directional antenna and sound and all that. He's not really transmitting much. Since we have connectivity to him on both the wired and wired standpoint, I'm going to go back over to my discovery. I really need to know where he's at. I want to hunt him down with RF. So I'm going to go in, but he's not talking much. He's quiet. And so I'm going to fire off a bunch of pings to him. And now I've coaxed him on the connected side into the air. So if I go back now to my discovery, here he is, that ping's running in the background. Now I go back over to look at him from a Wi-Fi view. Now when I come in and I say, hey, I want to locate you, I can see that, oh, look at that, he's actively transmitting away. In fact, I'll turn on some sound here, and in fact, turn that up a little bit, there you go. In fact, I put my hands here since I can't move to physically get closer to him. Let me see if I can kind of get some attenuation there. Yeah, so now you can kind of see it going down and back up now that I've taken my hands away from the antenna. So it gives you some sense of locating clients in an RF sense. If I want to know, well, what is he doing? I can actually come in and do a capture, and it's as easy as clicking capture, and we automatically set up all the filters, the channel widths, the BSS ID and all that. I'll go ahead and start the capture, and I can see that I'm getting some certain number of frames. Let me go ahead and stop here. Again, this can all be done remote as well as local. I'm using this on a remote screen. I can use it on the handheld. The screens are mirrored, so if you have a novice in the field, you can sort of guide them along. You might just use them just as your smart hands, just as hey, go put this unit over there, and running it completely remote. But I'm going to go ahead and put a comment in here. In fact, I'll just say Avril, and I will, and I'm going to go ahead and save that. And then let's go to Link Live, and over here. Let's see here. Let me go ahead and another nice thing is just that you can do multiple views. So you can look at the same network at the same time in lots of different ways. But this was a capture, so I'm going to come over into my files, and there's my capture file, 1045, just to keep me honest here. And I can instantly go, hey, I want to export that and bring it up into of course, Wireshark always wants to update, and then immediately bring it up into Wireshark, and there I can see my traffic and exactly what that particular client is doing. And so super easy workflow. Again, can be done locally, can be done remotely, and so
So that kind of concludes this part of sort of drilling in, right? Take any client, drill in, do OS detection, further port scans, look at vulnerabilities. Oh, it's running VNC. I can see what's the authentication mechanism required, et cetera, et cetera. Locate devices through path analysis, through Wi-Fi survey, through good old RF hunting with the directional antenna. And so, yeah, just a lot of capability to dive on particular devices that you need to know more about because they're living on your production network. So with that, I'll hand it back over.
Say, James, I do have a quick question that's come in. So what we were just talking about, how could that be used to specifically assist in the industrial manufacturing sector? Is this capable of identifying OT devices such as PLCs, VFDs, and HMIs?
Yeah, it would basically. Let me get back over here. I probably should have shared the screen. But since we have all the MAC address types and all that, now we don't know that they're PLCs, but you might know by what ports are open, right? What they are, and so you'd have the ability through services and port scans and all that to understand. You can also do UDP port scans if they happen to be streaming industrial devices. It's another unique new feature we added to the CyberScope. And so UDP port scanning, TCP port scanning, understanding the MAC addresses, understanding where they're located, what they're connected to, the switch that they're connected to would tell you a lot about the organization. And it can be as simple as, wow, why am I seeing an Apple device or a laptop plugged into my production switch or into my industrial Ethernet switch? And so there's just a lot of it, and of course topology mapping. So it's just a ton of visibility we bring to the network to spot nefarious devices and drill in on them and then locate them.
Hey, that's fantastic. Thanks, James. And by the way, I would just open everybody to say, if you have questions, we still have a couple minutes here before I pass it back to Avril. Go ahead and post those questions, and I'll try to get them answered before the end. Back to you, Avril.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, we're actually bang on time, which is pretty miraculous, isn't it, Jane? And and what we want to do is to give you some time for questions. So what you saw there is just a reminder where we are. We've validated the network, we've found the devices, and then we've profiled them now. We start looking at what they are, where they are, and what behaviors they've got. And James, we should have had two circles here, James, one around Nmap, and I didn't notice we should have circled the capture, which is the one of the other icons on the CyberScope.
And in fact, I showed path analysis also. In fact, it's a clean tic-tac-toe. It's a clean row down to 3.
Yeah. So it's that third row was James was also demonstrating, and this leads nicely then into. Oops, sorry. I meant to forward the slide. I didn't do that. There we go. Click the wrong button. Really, what I really tremendously like about the CyberScope, and I got super excited, perhaps more excited than NetAlly was themselves, was the fact that one can follow a process. I mean, I just love processes when it comes to security, because I think it becomes something that can be consistently done in a very methodical way. You don't need to have on-site expertise, like James was saying. You can really have someone out on site help you with this process, and you can then have your experts back in site. And even when someone like myself does a site assessment, I don't have all the expertise on all the different network nodes, the wireline and the wireless. And so even someone with IT professional expertise can also start to leverage off using people that are centrally based and sharing this information with them. So I really like the fact you follow a process, just like James was showing. Click on those different icons, doing certain functions as you move from discovery to identifying what's on your network to locating them. We didn't talk a lot about the analysis and reporting in this webinar. There's a lot of other features in the CyberScope. We were really focused on this webinar about the things that require a handheld to be out in the field that you just simply can't do from a network perspective, and to try and give you insights into why you want to be out on site with a handheld, and that you don't need to send a security professional to or a networking professional to help you do that. Of course, if you can perform more accurate assessments, right, then you can meet your compliance goals, ensure the robustness of your security profile. And of course, it's all about, in the end of the day, reducing the cost and complexity of your network. So as we come, if you like, to the last slide that we have, and then we want to open it up for questions. Some of our key messages here is all about enabling security professionals to make sure their networks are prepared, are ready in as much as possible for the potential attacks, to try and identify vulnerabilities before someone from outside is trying to exploit those vulnerabilities, give you the reporting, the analysis part that we weren't able to demonstrate allows you to take corrective actions. And then, of course, it's all about the compliance and committing to your network security. What we look at Cyberscope, some of the key things that I walked away as an independent consultant looking at this tool was it's not just a device. It's a process, and that's why I got really excited. It's not just that you've got something that runs things, it's helping you take the process of doing a site survey. And that to me is invaluable, absolutely invaluable, the way they've strung that together to take you through that process. It does provide a very comprehensive view of your network and the clients that are attaching to it and the traffic that's going across it. Absolutely fantastic to be able to see that. Again, it's all about identification of vulnerabilities so that you can fix those weaknesses, or at least make decisions as to whether or not you're going to fix those vulnerabilities. And to me, as a security professional, I just think this is a phenomenal tool, and I hope we've given you some insights, both myself with an independent view and then James showing you some things that you can do. So I hope you found this webinar very helpful. And with that, we've got about 7 minutes left, which we can open it up for questions.
Certainly. Thanks, Avril. Here's the first question to you, James. Have you tested this on fabric-enabled networks that use Anycast default gateways? Say, James, can you hear me?
Yeah, I have not. I have not personally. Is that like a Chromecast or one of the casting services for screen sharing?
Yeah, I don't have anything specific. We can follow up with that person later, James. Thank you.
Okay.
Here's the second one. Could this be used for patch management as well? So could this cyberscope be used?
It can, because in general you can detect the OS and the versions. Certainly for SNMP devices, you can see details of all your infrastructure devices and what versions of OSs various things are running. And you could also set strings. Hey, if you see anything of this version on this and that version on this, then make that red and flag that and raise it to the top.
Excellent, thank you. So that's it in terms of questions specifically. If the people listening have additional questions, of course, they could just reach out to NetAlly. And we're almost to the top of the hour, so we're timing really well. I guess in closing, then, James, I wanted to thank both you and Avril, of course. Fantastic webinar, great content, and definitely really kind of demonstrated the value of Cyberscope in some of these specific use cases. And I guess with that, I also wanted to thank everybody for attending today. There will be a version of this. This webinar will be recorded. You'll be able to go back and listen to it, or point it out to others who may want to listen to it as well. And should additional questions come up with anybody listening, again, just please reach out to us. Thank you all for your time today, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everyone.